In a world where success is often measured by wealth, power, and status, we sometimes forget the quiet strength of a parent's love. A love that doesn't need recognition but is powerful enough to change destinies. This is not just the story of a rich farmer or a man who owned land and luxury. This is the story of a father who had everything and felt incomplete the day he couldn't stand confidently beside his daughter. It is a story about a moment of failure that turned into a lifelong lesson, about tears that became the reason for transformation, and about a man who chose to become a student again, not for himself but for the one person who meant the world to him. Sometimes life doesn't challenge us where we are strong, it tests us where we feel the weakest. And in those moments, we discover who we truly are. This is a story that will make you feel, think, and maybe even look at your own life a little differently. Because at the heart of it lies one simple truth: when love becomes your reason, nothing in this world is impossible. The father who learnt English for his daughter. In a quiet, beautiful village surrounded by green fields and golden crops, there lived a wealthy farmer who was known not just for his riches but for his kindness, who owned hundreds of acres of land, a grand bungalow that stood like a symbol of his success, a farmhouse that reflected years of hard work. Though he had not received much formal education, life had taught him lessons no school ever could. He was wise, humble, and generous. He helped the poor without expecting anything in return. And he treated every worker, every laborer, every employee as if they were part of his own family. People in the village didn't just respect him, they loved him. But beyond all his wealth and reputation, there was one treasure in his life that meant more to him than anything else: his daughter. From the moment she was born, he saw her as his little princess. He gave her the best of everything, not just material comforts, but endless love, care, and protection. Every smile on her face was his victory, and every tear of hers felt like his defeat. As she grew older, his dreams for her grew even bigger. When she turned 8, he enrolled her in a prestigious private convent school in the nearby city. Every morning, while other children traveled by bus, she would go comfortably in a car, proudly carrying her father's love with her. At school, she was admired by everyone. Teachers prized her, students respected her, and she lived in a world where she felt confident and valued. Everything seemed perfect until one unexpected day changed everything. The school announced a parent teacher meeting where each parent was invited to come on stage and speak for 5 minutes about their child. For most parents, it was just a simple task, but for him, it became the biggest challenge of his life. In his village, he was fearless, confident, and powerful, a man whose words carried weight. But in that school, on that stage, there was one thing he lacked: English. The night before the meeting, he sat quietly trying his best to prepare. He memorized sentences, practiced in front of the mirror, and repeated words again and again, hoping he wouldn't fail. He wanted to make his daughter proud, but the next day, when his name was called and he walked onto the stage, something inside him collapsed. His hands began to tremble, his throat went dry, and his mind went completely blank. All the words he had learned disappeared. He stood there unable to speak, while the silence in the room slowly turned into whispers and then into laughter. That laughter didn't just echo in the hall, it pierced his heart. And worse, it reached his daughter. For the first time in her life, she felt ashamed. The respect she once enjoyed turned into mockery, and the confidence she carried shattered in a moment. That evening, she returned home in tears. Her father, who could never bear to see her cry, rushed to her and asked softly, "What happened, dear?" But what she said next broke him completely. Through her sobs, she said, "Because of you, everyone is laughing at me. I don't want to go to school anymore." Those words were not just complaints, they were pain, disappointment, and hurt all at once. In that moment, he didn't feel like a wealthy man or a respected figure. He felt helpless. For the first time in his life, he realized that all his success meant nothing if he couldn't stand confidently beside his daughter in her world. That night, he didn't sleep. He kept thinking about her tears, her words, and the pain in her voice. And before the sun rose the next day, he made a decision that would change everything. He decided to learn English. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things he had ever done. But this time, his motivation was stronger than his fear. No matter how busy he was, no matter how tired he felt, he showed up every single day. In the fields, while supervising work, he would repeat new words. In the rice mill, he would practice sentences in his mind. At home, he would sit for hours learning, listening, and improving. He hired a teacher who stayed by his side, clearing his doubts patiently. He attended one on one sessions, practiced speaking, made mistakes, corrected them, and tried again. People around him were surprised, some even laughed, but he ignored everything. Because for him, this was not about learning a language, it was about restoring his daughter's confidence. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Slowly, his fear turned into courage. His hesitation turned into confidence. And 1 year later, the same school held another parent teacher meeting. Once again, parents were invited to speak. This time, when his name was called, he walked onto the stage with calmness and strength. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation in his steps. He took the microphone, paused for a moment, and then began to speak. His words flowed, clear, confident, and full of emotion. He didn't just speak for 5 minutes, he spoke for nearly an hour. He spoke about his daughter, her dreams, her kindness, her future. But more than anything, his words carried a depth of love that everyone in the room could feel. The same hall that once echoed with laughter was now filled with silence, respectful, emotional silence. And when he finished, something beautiful happened. Everyone stood up and applauded. Teachers, students, parents, all of them, not for his English, but for his effort, his dedication, and his love as a father. And his daughter, she stood there with tears in her eyes once again. But this time, those tears were not of pain or shame, they were of pride. In that moment, she didn't just see her father as a wealthy man or a successful farmer, she saw him as her hero. Because sometimes true greatness is not in what we already know, but in what we are willing to learn for the people we love. In the end, this is not just a story about learning English, it is a story about love, sacrifice, and the silent promises a parent makes to their child. A father who had everything still chose to become a beginner just to protect his daughter's confidence. He proved that it is not never about age, background, or education. When your reason is strong enough, you can rise above any fear. That little girl who once felt ashamed now walks with pride, not because her father became perfect, but because he refused to give up on her. And maybe somewhere in our own lives, we all have something we are afraid to start. something we keep postponing because it feels too difficult or too late. But this story reminds us nothing is impossible when it is driven by love. So, here is something to think about. What is that one thing you would be willing to learn, no matter how hard it is, for someone you truly love? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Echo English for more such meaningful stories.